Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another TERA Dungeon Guide with me, Meoni of AceGamesTV. Today I'm looking at the 48 to 53 instance. This is the Ascent of Saravash. This is one of my personal favourites. It's quite tricky and there are a lot of really cool mechanics. So without further ado, let's throw you straight into the first boss. The first boss is Abu Kaizel, the soldier. So this fight starts out like a standard fight really, with a simple tank and spank mechanic. However, the differences start to become apparent when Abu Kaizel runs behind a fence that players are unable to get behind themselves. This introduces a summoned set of archers which come to the boss's aid and provide covering support at your face. These mobs despawn after a set period, however they will need to be DPS'd by anyone who can hit them down completely to reduce the damage on the party and make the life of the healer easier, so DPS those down as soon as possible. Once they are dead or despawned, the boss will return within range of the party, and all DPS should switch back to the boss. The other mobs to be aware of in this fight are when he's in melee range of the party. He summons soldiers. You want to pull these to the boss as much as possible and AoE them down. Once the archers die, he runs back like said, and he will continue to do this mechanic twice, until he reaches a grand old percentage of 30% of health, at which point he will flee up a tree branch. So when he does this, your party should be quick on their feet and chase after him up this tree. Be sure to kill all the ads on your way up, but by this stage you want to have all the ads that were below the tree dead, or you need to kill them very quickly. And as you climb the tree, you want to take them in small packs, AoE them down, and continue up the branch, clearing them as you come to them. Once you have carefully dealt with all of the ads, it's time to finish off the boss, who is now cornered up inside the tree. Smash his face in and use the chest behind him to receive your loot. The mechanics of the boss are fairly weak, to be honest. He just has the familiar ranged throwing of the grenade attack that these certain mobs have. He also has a cleave, and he also has some nasty abilities in front of him, so obviously DPS him from behind if you can. Be sure to finish off any remaining mobs that you have in your path and then move on through the next trash towards the next boss. There isn't anything particularly to be aware of on the trash, so I'm going to skip that entirely in explanation and go to the next boss. This leads you on to the next fight. This is Belser Mail the Caprin. Lore-wise, Belser Mail has taken form of an aspect of an ancient Caprin imp god, but that won't prevent you from being able to kill him, as he is still quite mortal indeed. During this fight, this guy repeatedly summons several normal imp elites, which summon their own little ranks of minion imps that are also non-elite. These need to die as soon as possible, as these imps continue to summon the smaller minions until they die, indefinitely. Failure to do so will cause problems with the rest of the fight and what happens next. Periodically through the fight, he summons a ring of barrels around him, and will attempt to drink from one of these barrels. These things need to be destroyed as soon as possible, otherwise he will regenerate health from this drink, which makes the fight unbearably, get it? Never mind, long and pointless. If the imps are still alive by the time he tries to drink, you will be overwhelmed and will be forced to GG and die, as there will be no hope about healing the damage or controlling the endless spawning legions of imps. In short, the DPS needs to be high enough on the ads to clear them as soon as possible, yet to do it fast enough to put enough damage on the boss. Otherwise, an occasional barrel drink failure will cost you 5 to 10 minutes of extra fighting. The boss himself doesn't have a lot to say for in terms of abilities. Stay behind him and DPS. The tank doesn't have to worry about much apart from frontal cleaves and having to pick up all these ads and keep them off the healer. There are other ways of doing this fight. For example, you can ignore the imps like we are attempting here, and we are trying to zerg the barrels and the boss. This only works if you've got a high DPS group, and I certainly would not recommend it for normal pug groups, so steer clear of things unless you know your group is willing to do this. Because obviously you will have to kill it rather quickly and have no barrel drink failures, otherwise you will be overwhelmed and will die terribly. Once this boss has been handled, grab your loot and head up through the next packs of mobs. There's nothing special here, so we'll head on to the next boss. The next boss is Versek. This Fang Spawn boss is behind a mob of passive gorillas, and will provide some entertainment with some of the abilities that you need to be aware of. During the fight with this thing, He has two powerful wide-reaching moves, one of which is a poison breath attack, the other a massive earthquake ground pound with his fists, the latter of which covers a massive zone, drawn out by a huge red circle on the ground. This is survivable, yet you do not want to be studying this, as it ranges from 80 to 90% of your HP gone in an instant for ranged. Like all Fang Spawn type mobs in the game, you do not want to be either in front of this boss or to the sides. Even behind him is not exactly safe, so your best bet is to be diagonal with him, especially as ranged, and to move accordingly as the fight progresses. Inside the fight itself, Versek will summon all of the gorillas you passed, and does this more than once in the fight. Now the best thing to do here is to use a ground pound to your advantage, kiting the gorillas around via a kiter, usually your healer. Here we have our kiter running around a circle around the boss, making the ads run across Versek's circle ground pound, and essentially making him kill his own minions. Usually your healer does make the best kiter in this situation due to aggro generation, and should be able to do so with ease usually, as long as your group members avoid unnecessary damage themselves and stand out of the red circle of doom. Once you have done this, usually you summons these ads twice per average fight on this boss, burn off his remaining HP and loot the rewards. You may have seen then that he put little red circles on the floor and threw meteors at them. This is another ability that you need to keep moving for and avoid, otherwise you will probably lose a lot of your HP on this. Remember, this guy does have the usual attacks associated with this monster type, such as the roll forward, frontal pounds and jumps. Take this all in your stead and you should be fine. Let's reap the loot and go off to the next boss. The next boss is actually two bosses, Naburus and Rubinaria. The royal king and queen of the basilisk have arrived, with a rather unique mechanic with which they are permanently enraged when they are adjacent to each other, and as such they start the fight in this state. Rubinaria is the size of your typical basilisk BAM outside that you find in the wild, whereas Naburus is incredibly oversized, much more powerful, and has very, very thick armoured skin. Typically, this fight goes as follows. You're going to need to split the basilisks apart, firstly, and as such the easiest way to do this is to kite Rubinaria away from Naburus. Occasionally she will spawn baby basilisks during the fight, which are normal elites, then run back to Naburus, which causes him to become hard, no pun intended, which enrages him and makes him harder to do damage to and harder to kill. And of course, if he is enraged, then that means Rubinaria is enraged too, and if a baby spawned there, they too will enrage. Rubinaria then needs to be pulled far, far away in the area you're fighting, but the babies have to be held by a damage dealer, who should easily be able to cleave through them, and doing so causes Rubinaria to come back to the spawn point, or the people damaging her spawn, and repeat the process. Slayers and Berserkers are best suited to the role of cleaving babies. No joke though, and usually this fight requires a lot of preparation with your group, and for people to avoid as much damage as possible, as obviously your damager will be, in many cases, the other side of the zone with the tank on Naburus. This fight is not exactly rocket science to plan out, in theory, however it does require coordination, and as such you should attempt to take it in as simple as possible with whatever classes you have available, and if possible, go with a non-pug group to save time on wipes to learn. That's not to say that it isn't puggable, because it certainly is. Just make sure you know what you're doing and arrange around the classes you have available. Now, you may have noticed in this footage that you'll be going, wait, you're not following your own tactics. Well, the reason is this is footage from a pug. This is quite an early pug. Not many people knew what they were doing. It was a bit of a test of waters thing, even for myself, before I learnt the tactics. This basically shows you how not to do it. We've kept the basilisk together quite a lot in this fight. We haven't split the DPS off properly, so we've ended up with two very enraged hard bosses. We managed to do this kill, but it took ridiculously long, and if you follow the tactics I've mentioned, then you can shorten this fight to the reasonable fight length it should be. But we made it ridiculously hard for ourselves and somehow managed to persevere through skill, I guess, and perseverance, and just pure endurance of the healer and the tank. But obviously, these guides are to show people how not to do things and how they should do things. So hopefully you will learn from this, and I won't see it in bugs. Nah. After you have beaten this rather fun yet painful encounter, we now move on to a very tricky fight indeed. So let's jump on to the next boss. So here we go, the last boss of the instance, the Ascent of Saravash. And like the name implies, the last boss is Saravash himself, a giant Naga. Known within the community as Saravash the Ridiculous. That's a statement as to the understanding level of players to this fight, and how tricky it can be, especially if you do not know what is going off. This is what this guide is for, so let's lay it down for you and try and help you out as much as possible. So Saravash has typical Naga moves, which are cleaves, jumps and diagonal movements, nasty lunges and horrible stomps. Yet every so often in this fight, Saravash has a few components that make him so difficult, and why people have so much of a challenge with him. The first thing to understand is that periodically during this encounter, Saravash will summon Baneling-like creatures, very similar to the StarCraft Banelings, in that they blow the fuck out of you if you are near them, sort of. The problem with these ads is not the ads themselves, but with the crystal that spawns on an emote with them. So this crystal spawns somewhere in the room when the ads spawn at the same time, and as soon as this crystal is up, an emote will pop up on screen. As soon as that emote pops up, that needs to be destroyed, like it needs to be your #1 priority. That is before the room gets completely zerged by the Banelings. So destroying this crystal is your #1 priority, and once destroyed, it will give the party a 20-second complete immunity to all damage taken. So it's extremely useful, and is needed. If a crystal is not destroyed, it will one-shot everybody in the party. The Banelings, however, fixate on a player, one player, and chase that person around the room. If they touch that player, they freeze, and a red circle appears around them in a 4-meter diameter. Players have roughly 5 seconds to move out of this circle before a void zone appears. This zone applies a movement debuff and will obliterate everything inside of it. This is survivable, very barely, but is survivable, but yet is completely avoidable in every situation and should be done so. Players are, however, able to manipulate these Banelings. By kiting the Baneling chasing you out of the group and out of a room out of the way, hitting it with a ranged ability will freeze it and cause a massive AoE to happen outside of the group. However, the problem here comes with going too far out of a room and going too far away from people is really bad, considering the DPS requirement on that crystal to be destroyed as soon as possible. It goes without saying that that will insta-kill the party if it is not destroyed within time. So the big failure here is that players face over-focusing on the crystal and ignoring the Banelings, or being too focused on the Banelings and the crystal one-shotting everyone. That's the reason people wipe on this boss, not the actual boss itself, but the little insta-give mechanics. The balance comes with your ability to kite these Banelings, deal with them, and how fast you can destroy that crystal. Ranged are extremely favourable because of this, as they can still attack the crystal whilst kiting the Banelings out of the room slightly. So if you have survived this first real challenge in TERA Online, then obviously I salute you and wish you the very best in your next dungeon. But for now, congratulations from me. If you have liked this guide and have found it of some use in your adventures in TERA Online, be sure to hit that like button below, and please subscribe to AceGamesTV today for more videos like this one and many more to come. I've been Meoni of AceGamesTV, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.